on the board of the Peace Corps, a Fulbright Fellow, co-creator of the social media platform Humans of Kiribati, and co-creator of the publications American Asylum, I don't know if I said that right, and When There Was No Money. He received his PhD from the Department of Anthropology at the University of Pittsburgh in 2014, and his dissertation topic was turned into the 2018 Sundance film selection, A Note's Arc, which I think a lot of us saw.
Yeah.
His most recent film collaboration, One Word, highlights the Marshall Islanders' fight for climate justice and survival. Collaborating with governments, international media, nonprofit organizations, and citizens from around the world, Mike has spent the last 21 years raising global consciousness of the climate crisis from the front lines, and he works at the University of Cincinnati. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Great. Well, thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining in on this meeting and inviting me to share a little bit about what the latest legislation, I guess you could say, that I've been a strong proponent for, the Climate Displaced Persons Act. Let me go ahead and start sharing. Yeah. All right. Are we still good?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So this actually has a strong connection to CCL, and back BC times in 2019, before Corona, I actually was able to go in and meet with Senator Markey and Senator Velasquez and talk about what they were putting together. And they were putting together this Climate Displaced Persons Act, and with the goal of establishing a global climate change resilience strategy to authorize the admission of climate displaced persons and for other purposes. Now, we'll get into those other purposes as well, but as of now, currently, there are only 4 co-sponsors within the Senate: Blumenthal, Casey, Booker, and Van Hollen. And then within the House, there's only 10 co-sponsors: and New York, California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Texas. The Climate Displaced Persons Act was kind of thrown together. The ideas started floating around in 2017, 2018. And in September of 2019, Senator Markey introduced S2565. And just 1 month later, Representative Velasquez from New York City introduced HR 4732 in the 116th Congress. They were able to be reintroduced in the 117th Congress as S1335 and HR 2826. No changes were made to the bill, to the text. They were just migrate from the 116th to the 117th, and more than likely it'll be in the 118th Congress when that time does come around. So what is this? The bills basically say that the US should reduce its domestic greenhouse gas emissions on a scale and rate proportionate to its historical responsibility and the urgency of the climate change progression that we are all very well aware of. And then it also says it should welcome the shared responsibility of climate change adaptation, global disaster risk reduction, resiliency building, and disaster response and recovery. So it's not only about reduction of carbon emissions, but it's also taking responsibility for our share of what we have done. It says we should not only provide durable solutions, technologically based and innovationally based, but we should also take responsibility of creating durable solutions for those who don't have anywhere else to go. And first and foremost thought is, if you saw a Note's Arc, is Kiribati. Kiribati is a poster child for climate change in the Pacific. You got the Marshall Islands. If anyone saw One Word, If anyone saw the underwater president, I believe that was in 2015. The Maldives are the poster children of climate change in the Asia, in the Indian Ocean. You also have Tokelau, you have Tuvalu. So these are nations that I term as endangered nations because of the ecological genocide that is happening on land and in water to their country. So where will they go? What will they do? And first and foremost, do they even want to leave? A lot of people, my Kiribati mother and father, they don't want to leave. So for a lot of people that might see this as, oh, we're going to open borders in the USA and we're going to invite all these migrants and all these people to this country because of climate change. Well, I can say more than half of the people don't want to leave. And you can see that in the current situation that we have with Russia and with the Ukraine. People don't want to leave, but in cases such as bad as that and such as bad as climate change, it's either leave or die. So this bill calls forth the better angels in humanitarian efforts towards climate change, and not just at technology and innovation and reduction of greenhouse gases, but creating a refuge and a space for humans to survive who can no longer survive in their own home countries. So what is a climate displaced person? Well, this bill has defined a climate displaced person as such, and might I point out to you the importance of having the term climate displaced person. So many times we hear climate refugee. Well, in 1948, 1951, and when it was revised, the protocol on refugees did not include environmental disasters. If you were part of a certain group, if you were part of, of war, if you were part of strife, not because your green is brown because of drought, or not because your backyard is under the ocean because of a king tide. So there is no climate refugee defined by anyone except for the media. So the bill puts forth this definition. Any person who, for reasons of sudden or progressive changes in the environment that adversely affects his or her life or living conditions, is obliged to leave his or her habitual home, either within his or her country of nationality or another country, needs a durable resettlement solution, and whose government cannot or will not provide such durable resettlement solutions. Within Kiribati, within the nation that I work first and foremost with, there is a lot of internal displacement and a lot of internal migration as a result of islands losing parts of villages or families losing entire homes because of the king tides. And what the ocean takes, the ocean does not give back. So this creates a definition that our government could potentially work with. So there are 7 key things to this bill, not both bills. The first is required data collection and reporting. So the bill proposes that the president, in coordination with a host of agencies, Department of Commerce, the EPA, Department of State, USAID, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, DOD, DHS, and so many other within the United States. But not only that, without or outside of the United States. I think of like IOM, International Organization of Migration, United Nations, nonprofit branch of migration, UNHRC, UNICEF, all of these agencies that are right now activated and actively working on helping out, the Ukrainian refugees that are fleeing war and violence. A defined refugee. That's something that we don't have for environmentally displaced persons. The next part of it, global climate change resilience strategy. So this calls forth the creation of, with the president creating resilience among communities, strategies facing harmful impacts from climate change, and reducing the vulnerability of persons affected by climate change. And this would be through the coordination of a high-level climate change action plan. Think of John Kerry's, the climate czar's position. Think of mitigating the impacts through all these organizations within the government and all those lists of agencies I just ran through. Foreign service officers would be trained and they would be assigned to a country from which climate displaced persons having been displaced would get instructions in what to do and how to process their visas, their migration, creation of a plan for these individuals and these communities. Right now, the immigration process is so backed up. I have a friend seeking asylum right now from Kiribati as a result of domestic violence. So she's part of a group, that being women and children, that she is filed under. She's been in prison for a year and a change. And then on top of that imprisonment, she's been in line for 7 years. So there would be training for not only foreign services officers, but a special category for these climate displaced people. The strategy would also create guidance on humanitarian impacts, and this would be straight for diplomatic missions in addressing the crisis that is happening right now and will happen in larger masses within the foreseeable future. It would create, and I kind of went over this, it would create the admission of climate displaced persons. So there would be a migration route for these people. As it stands right now, for the beginning fiscal year, the proposal was 50,000. And that would be the baseline baseline starting point. The number that the president determines before the beginning of the fiscal year and after would be appropriated by consultations with Congress and humanitarian concerns that are brought up by DHS or by immigration services. So broadly, it would be for these individuals that would be under that category of the climate displaced person. Application for climate displaced person status shouldn't be charged a fee. It proposes a non-citizen who qualifies for this climate displaced person status should be eligible for resettlement assistance, entitlement programs, and other benefits available to refugees who are admitted. A spouse or children of non-citizen who are granted climate displaced person status may be granted the same status as a climate change or as a climate displaced person if accompanying or following to join such non-citizens up until the age of 21. There's a lot more details I could go into, but because it's such a short time period, I'm going to leave it as that. But these are the key proponents or key parts to the Climate Displaced Persons Act. Admission of climate displaced persons, guidance on humanitarian impacts on climate change, training for foreign services officers, global climate change strategy, required data collection and reporting. And the key thing is the definition, because until now, still till now, we don't have a defined climate displaced person here in the United States or anywhere else around the world that accepts migration as a form of adaptation. Okay, that was a quick run through, but I promised you it would be bare bones. And if there's any questions, I am happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mike. It was great, a great overview. First question, do you have a call to action for us?
I do. Citizens Climate Lobby, and I've been in discussion with them a lot, and I've actually had a former president of the nation of Kiribati in discussion with them as well. CCL is looking for new directions to go. The Carbon Innovation Act is great, but they've gained so much. They've hired so many people and their portfolio is ready for expansion. And a call to action would be add your voice, write Madeline, write, CCL leadership, to think about adding Climate Displaced Persons Act as something that we could add to our portfolio of asks. So we have our big ask, the Carbon Innovation Act, but then we have all these other supporting asks. I know when I go to meet with my representative, I have a whole lot of other things that I can ask because I know that he won't go for the act. I know he won't go for our number one thing, but if you can email Madeline, or I think there's a job form or something like a Google form. I will find that and I will email it to you. And it's a quick 5-minute thing. Where would you like to see Tony Cerna? Yes, Tony is collecting that input. And that job form that I do have the link for will go straight to him. So the more voices that we have, I think the better it is. And I also know that CCL wants to be more humanitarian based. They want to get more of the humanity into climate change. And that started in 2019 when they asked me to paint the human face of climate change for them at that last conference before COVID hit the world. I just got my start and then COVID.
Do you think it's also worthwhile just, trying to get additional co-sponsors? Like, is it a good idea for us to email our representative or ask our representative to co-sponsor?
Definitely. And I know where's Paul Thompson? He's not in Michigan.
Minnesota, I think.
He's in Minnesota. I know that I'll be meeting with a representative in June personally from Minnesota. I can't remember his name, but I will be bringing that up with him as well.
Other questions for Mike? You can either just unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand, or type them in the chat. David.
Mike, thanks for the presentation, and I love that bill. It warms my heart. That being said, I don't think there are too many hearts ready to be warmed these days in Congress or in the nation as a whole. You talked about appealing to people's better angels. Better angels are not in the ascendance these days, and we're in a period of antipathy towards immigration, the likes of which I've never seen in my lifetime. Probably, going all the way back to the 1920s when they passed all that anti-immigration legislation. How do you intend to deal with the political atmosphere that we're working in right now?
So many times when I speak, I tell stories from the front lines. And I have been known to make representatives and their staff cry when I talk. And I believe that, I always say this, but it's corny. If the climate can change, so can we. Meaning that the heart of the matter comes down to humanity. When you look at climate change, when I first started talking about it, I was in Pella, Iowa. The year was 2003, I think it was. And people didn't believe me. And it was known as global warming back then. And 10 years after that, I was invited back to Pella, Iowa to be a keynote at a climate conference. And that was just 10 years. I believe that climate change is the greatest moral challenge of our generation. And humanity will respond. Humans always respond. The tornadoes that I've seen, the hurricanes that I lived through, the earthquakes that I've been in, whenever there is a disaster, natural or unnatural, a bomb, gunshots, the best of us comes out in the worst of times. And you guys, us in the United States, we're protected. We're not living knowing that that well water is salinated, knowing that that cup killed my niece, who was just 2 years old, because she got salinated water. And she suffered diarrhea, she suffered vomiting, she suffered dehydration. I know what climate change can do to humans. When you show what it has done, that's when it really changes people's minds and hearts. The more people that I talk to, the more movies I help produce, the more stories that are shared from the front lines. We are your future. And win or lose, I'm always going to be fighting. And eventually, you know, I teach college, and I hope that my lessons are, number one, eye-opening, and number two, productive. For me, tests, quizzes, exams aren't what education is all about. Education happens when people take action. And so this is a big test for humanity. And I just go in with that mindset that someday someone is going to learn something. And it might not be during my lifetime, but eventually we will come to find out that we are all human. We are all one family. And it doesn't matter what color, red, blue, or independent, we all need each other. And so that's my mindset. I have a long-term vision, and I'm not stuck in what happens in 2022, because they've given us till 2030. And it's kind of funny when you know what your death date is projected to be. And I think I'll still be talking after 2030. I feel like a dead man walking most times.
Well, thanks, Mike. I will acknowledge that your message is extremely powerful. I've seen your films and heard you speak, and I think it's very, very moving and can move people. Barbara, go ahead with your question.
I just wanted to make the comment that it seems to me that even if we can't get something like this passed anytime soon, and even if there's people that you can never appeal to their humanity, the fact that we're talking about refugees is very important, because it may ring a bell inside their head that, hey, these people are going to be coming to my shores, so this is going to affect me. So I think this is a very important bill, because it's going to impact both people that care about other people and people that only care about themselves. I mean, this is, I think it's really a great thing to be talking about, regardless of any kind of political viability.
Good point.
Yeah, we're all human.
Craig.
Yeah, couple questions, Michael. First of all, I thought that was really interesting. I was not really aware of what you were doing, but I wholeheartedly support it. One is just to take off on what David brought up. It seems to me the whole point of your organization is to define climate displaced persons so they don't need to try to sneak in through the borders, that they legitimately can relocate in the United States. So, you know, despite what some people's feelings about undocumented immigrants, this bill, it seems to me, would avoid that and give people who need it status to emigrate to the US. Am I right? Do you agree with that?
It would be, and I wholeheartedly believe that the U.S. should be the leader and not the follower. And you know, John F. Kennedy said we were, or was it Reagan? We were the beacon on the hill. And I think if the U.S. takes action, it can encourage and influence other nations to do the same or similar things. In New Zealand, about 5 years ago, Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party had put forth a kind of a climate displaced refugee type movement in Parliament. Now, the difference is New Zealand and Australia, they are in Oceania. And in 2001, New Zealand opened up the PAC, Pacific Access Migrant category. And it's a migration scheme that takes Kiribati people, 75 people a year. Now, granted, there's like 113,000 people in Kiribati in the entire nation. So 75 people a year is kind of like a trickle of a trickle. And so that is a jobs migration platform. It's not a climate change. It's not a global warming migration. It's a migrant labor force. And, you know, New Zealand has been having trouble getting people to work on their farms. And so a lot of people from Kiribati go into the agricultural sector and they work, and eventually after so many years, they are allowed to get residency and then eventually become citizens. And my Kiribati sister actually went through the process, and now her son is in university. So it's creating options for not only her family, but my family. You know, we're all family. And I think the USA is having similar issues with filling jobs. And maybe, just maybe, migration could be an answer to fulfilling, you know, job help wanted signs.
My second question, I think you pretty much answered it, was going to be are there other nations, and you mentioned New Zealand, I guess, other nations that have comparable legislation impending, and is there an effort to try to harmonize these ideas among all nations?
And you know how I said I think it would be great if the USA would lead.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right now they're the only ones with something on the table. The labor movement that created that bill, it kind of died. And while we might only have 14, 16 sponsors and co-sponsors in the US Congress, that's 16 more than they have in New Zealand. So as of right now, it's just the USA.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike, so much. We really appreciate your time and your work on this. We'll share this call to action with our whole roster. And if you have additional information that you want to pass along to us that we can share, we'd be glad to.
I just want to say thank you again for letting me come in and speak to you. I do see that Nadine put the Google Doc that is for CCL. So thank you, Nadine. Thank you very much, as well as the text. On section 2, line 11 in the text, you'll see how I was able to weasel our way into that bill.
Okay, we'll look for that.
All right. You guys
Okay,
have
thanks.
a great day.
Thanks a lot.